Hello, my fearless friend. You have tuned into Renegade Files, your underground connection to the paranormal, the unsolved, and the unusual. You are now in the company of outcasts. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, coming to you from the Jungle Villa Outpost, deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 84, Forbidden Self-Reliance and the Rent-Seeking Pimpocracy. When a large enough contingent of the economy as a whole is made up of jobs that add no value, then the self-reliance activities in society that bypass those mechanisms become vilified by the organizations and employees of the no-value-added processes. In this episode, we will dissect what that sentence means for you and I as individuals, and explore how the activity described has impacted society. To do so, I will coin a new term, the Pimpocracy. In this episode, we'll forego the numbered sections of content. Often that works really well. But for today, I'm going to cruise on a slightly more rant-oriented path. There are headings that bookend some of the ideas, but I'll just refrain from numbering them. They do divide the content so we can build our understanding as we unravel this interconnected phenomenon of how a pimpocracy leverages influence to maintain its position while simultaneously marginalizing our ability to do without it. I think you're really going to like this episode because it's a new way to look at something that we all feel and think about and talk about all the time. This is about our place in the world and our relationship with our government, which we have built. So many times we imagine the quote-unquote government as being something like a giant singular personality that operates like some ancient personified Greek god. But the reality is, in the U.S., the government is literally made up of the citizens. It may not always be for the people, and it may be less and less by the people, but it is absolutely and always of the people. The human beings that work in our government departments are our brothers, our friends, ourselves. Why then would we tax and fine and regulate and red tape ourselves to death? The answer is because many of those individuals have wedged themselves into a place and into a department that accumulates income from facilitating transactions that are void of reciprocal value. And this extends from the clerk who processes your vehicle registration to the lobbyist who earns his company billions of dollars by getting a legislator to change a single sentence in a 700-page bill. The more you take care of yourself, the more you are marginalized by the bureaucrat class whose livelihood relies on you playing ball, so they can take their cut for doing their part. And the part that they play is taking their cut. So, join me, and together we will explore forbidden self-reliance and the rent-seeking pimpocracy. A pimp is someone who adds no value to the transaction, but profits by way of allowing the transaction to take place. A pimp positions himself as the parasitic middleman, taking his cut without participating. In fact, his only participation is the taking of his cut. This precisely describes a vast amount of activity in the modern American system of big government's collusion with big business. That dangerous situation that President Dwight Eisenhower warned us of in his now famous televised speech right before he left office, and which we, as a nation, summarily ignored. Eisenhower was speaking specifically about the big business of military contractors, but the government has aligned with countless other businesses and has their hands in the pockets of everyone else from the top to the bottom. And the systems and mechanisms that both the enormous corporations and the bloated bureaucratic governments use to line their pockets are all of those thousands of things which facilitate the day-to-day consumption, survival, entertainment, transportation, education, and, to put it succinctly, the activities of being alive. As someone so eloquently put it once, from cradle to grave. An endless list of pimps have positioned themselves along the supply chain of everything you want to do, have to do, and are mandated by law to do. And at every one of those checkpoints, the only way through is to hand over to that gatekeeper some money. Because these people and these enormous departments make their living by being the middlemen between you and the things you must have to survive, the activities of someone who tries to survive outside of that system become ridiculed, vilified, and, in many cases, outlawed. For example, one of the most ancient ways to feed yourself is by fishing. Fishing is a definitive self-reliant activity. But now, if you want to use a stick and a string and a hook baited with a minnow to catch a fish, you must have a fishing license. The person whose job it is to sit in the county tax collector's office, take your information and your money, then issue you a license to fish, adds nothing to your ability to catch fish. The fishing license isn't the same kind of license as a driver's license or a CDL, which you can only get after passing a test to prove that you can drive a car or a semi-truck. The license to practice law is like that, the license to practice medicine, but fishing licenses are purely for generating income for the state. And the clerks who issue them exist simply as middlemen between you and the fish. And for this, they take their cut. This is their job, their livelihood. They are, in effect, pimping the fish themselves, for without those, there would be no fishing and thus no license. Extrapolate that across a myriad of building permits, vehicle registrations, license plates, insurance mandates, property taxes, business permits, bankers who charge you to store and retrieve your own money, government commissioners who debate endlessly, and on and on and on ad nauseum. Much of our modern economy is built upon jobs like these, where the only purpose of the job is to take a percentage of the money passing between two people trying to do business. I say this is a pimpocracy. Fiat currency not only fuels it, but demands it. But there are solutions and realistic ways out of the cycle moving forward. And if you come with me today, we will explore what this is all about, how it happens, and in defining it, we'll see some clear ways out of it. But before we move on, let's define some ideas. A few definitions and some background. What is self-reliance? It is the ability to take care of yourself. If a large bureaucratic government is in the business of selling you the means to do this, then they paint their goods and services as a luxury they will give to you for free. This harvests your votes. But then you find that their services are in fact not free, but that we pay for them with our tax dollars and, as importantly, our freedoms. The more freedoms they take from us, the more reliant on their system we become. Their commerce is promises, and all they ever deliver is a need for more time. They trade in pure lies without remorse because their sales pitch puts them in office regardless of their performance. They create a sense of urgency which drives an immediate necessity. Thomas Paine told us, quote, "Immediate necessity makes many things convenient, which, if continued, would grow into oppressions." That's from Thomas Paine's revolutionary pamphlet called Common Sense. Revolutionary in the literal sense because it was describing how America could break free from being a colony of England. And we totally did that. That's an enormous project. It's hard for us to even imagine these days. Thomas Paine in that same paper wrote, quote, "Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, the latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse and the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last is a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one, for when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without a government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer." End quote. So this is much of the frustration we all feel today, regardless of who heads the executive branch. And this is that feeling that not only are we the bearers of a long stream of excessive tampering and bad decisions, enormous inflation, unfathomable spending, stagnating economies, and endless regulations that stifle creativity in business, but we are simultaneously financing the entire circus with our own hard-earned money. Tax dollars that we not only pay, but that our employers match, and they pay a fee for the privilege of mailing in those payments. There are, quite literally, fees for paying the fees. When I pay my property tax, I have to pay what they have the nerve to call a convenience fee. This is because I'm paying with a bank card, which uses money that my bank charges me a fee for. So the bank charges me a fee for giving them my money, and I might add they invest it in the meantime, and this money, which I pay a fee to put in the bank, and that I use to pay my property tax plus their convenience fee, has already been taxed. It's taxed before I ever get it. So why, For God's sake, have we created and financed a system that no one would ever logically want? It's like changing the clocks twice a year. It's annoying. It accomplishes nothing. No one can even provide a definitive answer for why we started doing it. All of those elevator speeches about having more time to harvest crops, or so the kids aren't at the bus stop in the dark, every bit of that is total urban legend. We change the clocks twice a year because that's just what we do. Shrug. Everyone hates it. And if you really want to know the reason we keep doing it, control. The government tells you what time it is. Just when you get used to it, they change it again because the government tells you what time it is. That's the only reason it exists. Shoutouts to Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and most of Arizona for not participating in changing the time. Anyway, that's probably an entire episode of its own, but you get the point. The real question is, how did we get to this place where a huge governmental machine taxes our taxes and charges us fees for paying them? What are the benefits? Because there must be some. And what has created this? Two things: rent seeking and fiat currency. Rent seeking is the act of growing one's existing wealth by manipulating the social or political environment without creating new wealth. This puts the pimp in Pimpocracy. This is the example of the state selling you a fishing license. They create wealth for their department, but add no wealth in return. They offer no service in exchange. The service they provide for buying the fishing license is not arresting you, or not charging you another fine. You could argue that the Fish and Wildlife Department of the state provides education, studies and manages populations of game, or prevents over-harvesting of natural resources. But all of these are examples of what I call perceived performance. It seems like making it illegal for me to catch this or that fish would save fish. But really, it's often just setting that fishery aside for a special interest, who can pay for a bigger license, and whose business facilitates a dozen more rent-seeking regulatory fees. For example, does regulating the red snapper fishery down to 1 day a year when recreational anglers are allowed to catch this species actually save any red snappers from overfishing? When commercial licenses for the fish are sold in blocks of 100,000 pounds per season? And don't quote me on the exact numbers, but the commercial red snapper licenses have become so valuable that many who hold one never even fish because they sublease their license to another fisherman and charge them even more money. This is rent seeking on top of rent seeking. It lets numerous hands profit at multiple points along the chain between government agency and fish in the boat by selling permits to catch hundreds of thousands of pounds of the fish, which becomes so valuable that those who buy the licenses can resell them at a profit. And meanwhile, it's against the law for me to keep a single red snapper that I caught while grouper fishing, so I must throw it back, even though, because it was caught from 200 feet deep, it's going to die anyway. U.S. fisheries are managed by NOAA and federal regulations, while foreign fishing vessels stuff their holds with fish that they sell back to us. These foreign vessels save enormous expenses by avoiding all of the OSHA mandates, insurance, pollution mitigation, payroll taxes, food and safety inspections, and fishing regulations that American fishermen must pay for and endure. So all of the rent seekers who have their hands in the commercial fishing industry pockets obliterate our ability to compete and force these jobs overseas in the process. They also make it so complicated and license dense for a free citizen to legally catch a fish that it is dizzying. If I want to catch a saltwater fish, I have to have a license for that. If I want to catch a fish in a freshwater lake, I have to have another license for that. In addition to the licenses, if I want to catch a snook, I have to have a snook stamp for my license, which costs more money. And the snook has to be at least 28 inches long, but it can't be longer than 33 inches long. Anglers refer to that size of a snook as a slot snook because it fits in the slot of 5 inches between 28 inches long and 33 inches long. So if it's too small, you have to throw it back, and if it's too big, you have to throw it back. If I want to catch a lobster, I have to have another stamp, more money. Every species of grouper and snapper has a different size limit, by about 2 or 3 inches at the most. You absolutely have to have the fishing app or a book in front of you to be able to tell some of these species apart because the differences can be extremely subtle. And the seasons for each species is different. And some species, they don't know when the season will be. It's like TBA. We'll let you know when you can catch one. And once you figure out what kind of fish you've caught, and if it's in season, they all have various bag limits. You can keep up to 10 of any snapper species, but if you do catch more than one species of snapper, you can still only keep a total of 10. Some groupers you can't keep at all, but you can keep one of most groupers, and a total of 2 if you get more than one kind, but in some places, those 2 groupers count toward your 10 fish aggregate, which snappers form a part of because they both live on the bottom of the ocean, and I'm not making that up. Oh, and tilefish are in the grouper bag limit too. I think. I mean, I understand that regulation is part of conservation, and I'm all for it. I go by the fishing rules. But the rules become so insane. Red snapper are literally jumping in the boat at this point. It's almost impossible to not catch one in many places. But if you're only allowed to catch them 1 or 2 days a year, why is this? Because the bureaucracy of Florida Fish and Wildlife says that they're overfished. How are they overfished if you're never allowed to fish for them? Well, because the aforementioned commercial permit bag limits are in tons. So it's illegal for me to catch one, and that's going to save the natural resource when a commercial fisherman can catch 100,000. And I didn't mean to make this a fishing episode, but this example just makes the point so well. And the costs of the licenses and the myriad of other regulations make becoming a commercial fisherman an enormous expense. Like, if you can actually afford to do it, then you totally don't need to do it. And this happens in many industries. The cost of operating a company is largely the cost of financing the millions of rent seekers our economy is built upon. Rent-seeking activities have negative effects on large segments of the society by reducing economic efficiency, misallocating resources, stifling competition, reducing wealth creation, eroding government revenue, furthering income inequality, increasing debt, and fostering both corruption and the resulting public distrust of institutions as a whole. Rent seeking is the extraction of uncompensated value from others without making any contribution to productivity. In short, pimping. And this pimpocracy extends far beyond our fishing examples. At institutional levels, new tiers of rent-seeking threaten to destroy entire paradigms. Haven't you heard the stories of some guy who tries to build a house and live off grid by digging his own well and building out a bunch of solar and essentially disconnecting from all of the county services wherever he lives? So then the county dredges up some old homesteader prohibition law from 150 years ago, fines the guy to death, threatens to arrest him, and basically makes his life miserable because they drag him through the system of enforcing some law that they made, which makes it illegal for someone like that to have a house that isn't hooked to the county electric grid, that isn't hooked to their water system, that doesn't pay for their garbage collection, and that doesn't use whatever other services they dream up and staple onto the arrest warrant. And when it comes down to it, the whole entire affair has nothing to do with the safety or the health or the hurricane codes or structural requirements that make a house fit to live in, but in reality are only enacted because someone like that is circumventing the cash flow coming into the pockets of all those many and sundry rent seekers in the supply chains that have been developed around the process of building and maintaining and living in a house in America. And the giant housing development companies print money by bulldozing millions of acres to pack as many houses as close together as they can to maximize the impact fees they have to pay. And the counties and cities continually expand how many houses or units can be squeezed onto an acre, because doing so increases those impact fees they can charge these huge companies. This is because the cost of leveraging some higher tier rent-seeking activity is nothing compared to the income potential. This is called the Tullock paradox, named for economist Gordon Tullock. Tullock, no relation, and the paradox is that rent-seeking and rent-seekers wanting political favors can bribe politicians at a cost much lower than the value of the favor to the rent-seeker. For instance, a rent seeker who hopes to gain $1 billion from a particular policy may only need to bribe politicians $10 million, which is only 1% of the gain. Why would someone sell out $1 billion for a mere $10 million? Because it isn't their money in the first place. Also, competition between different politicians eager to offer favor to rent seekers may bid down those bribes. Finally, rent seekers can return some of the money they swindle by making campaign contributions to the politicians who provided the enabling legislation. So at every level, from the $17 fishing license to the $1 billion greenhouse gas study, the rent-seeker economy lines its pockets with taxpayer dollars while providing not a penny of value in return. This creates an entire economic segment of departments and individuals who have a vested interest in the population relying on the activities that force them to populate their payment offices and online dashboards. For this reason, there is nothing a rent seeker hates more than someone who is self-reliant. If you grow your own vegetables in your backyard, then you dodge the food safety license the restaurant has to buy. You don't help pay the grocery store's property tax by paying $50 for 2 bags of nothing. You don't facilitate the vehicle registration taxes on the delivery trucks. In short, there is no opportunity between the tomato plant and your table for the rent seeker to reach into your pocket, so they hate you for it. How does this manifest? In articles such as this one, entitled Green Menace, Study finds food from urban agriculture has 6 times larger carbon footprint. Written by the University of Michigan, and yes, that's the byline, and published by SciTech Daily. The study the article references was financed in part by the U.S. National Science Foundation, which has a budget of $10 billion and a board of 24 directors who require no Senate confirmation and are appointed by the president, as are the director and the deputy director, but those do need to be confirmed to get the job, but no one who works there is elected. So in other words, rent seekers with a budget of $10 billion. Now, maybe they do tons of good things. I don't really know. But if this socio-politically motivated hack job article is any indication of what they churn out, I actually wonder. The article's conclusion is that big corporate farms produce endless monoculture crops with the use of pesticides and herbicides, and that creates less CO2 than growing herbs and vegetables in an urban garden. And just so you know, I'm not spinning what they say, this is from the article. Quote, "For example, conventional farms often grow a single crop with the help of pesticides and fertilizers, resulting in larger harvests and a reduced carbon footprint when compared to urban farms." End quote. Absolutely no one is believing this. Let me read a few lines from the comment section below that article. Get your popcorn out, right? One comment reads, "The goal is to make growing your own food illegal and completely controlling the food supply. You will eat what you are told and like it." Another comment says, quote, "The carbon footprint angle is a gimmick to guarantee publication. In every other way, locally sourced food is better." And finally, the last comment tells us, quote, "This article is absolute horseshit." Oh man, I love, don't you love the internet, right? So all of this pimpocracy protectionism has deeper socio-political roots, and while there's no need for us to incorporate a sociology PhD here today, it is worth noting some of the ideas these rent seekers leverage. Mainly gnosis and experiential knowledge, fear and politics, and how learning types affect understanding, and the marginalization of the pagan traditions. So, let's go through those real quick. Gnosis and Gnostic traditions of experiential knowledge are always persecuted and marginalized in favor of intellectual knowledge, especially by those who earn a living teaching us that intellectual knowledge. This is that old tradition of ridiculing a native population's ideas that all things have a spirit. So the trees have a spirit, the river, the butterfly. This is mistranslated as the natives believed that all things had a human ego and an awareness personality. It is depicted as a simpleton idea that substituted for knowledge in a world before science. So you get these parables like, the native populations believed that the cloud spirit, so the cloud's ego personality, made it rain. They believed that the tree spirit ego personality built the trees out of wood the way a person makes a desk out of wood. Those silly natives believed a wolf spirit howled to make the moon spirit walk into the sky. The implications from the academics being that the poor natives didn't understand the myriad of arbitrary names we've given to all things in biology, astronomy, and geology, so they invented personalities for the trees and the rocks to explain how the world worked. But the reality is that native First Peoples' relationships to the world and their understanding of it were and are far more eloquent and complex. I'm not here to say what someone does or doesn't believe, but as I understand some of the Calusa and Seminole spirituality from my own area, it seems far closer to the Buddhist concept of all things are consciousness. so a reflection of your consciousness. But so too are you a reflection of all other things, and so treat each grain of rice as if it were the Buddha himself. This is that reverence for nature and reverence for all things that Native Americans also seem to have. All things are consciousness is a far more sophisticated worldview than all things are conscious, which is the Anglo-projectionism of the teacher who told me in elementary school that the Native Americans believed the trees had a spirit. In general, intellectual knowledge is painted as more important than experiential knowledge, because rent-seeking benefits from the institutions of intellectualism and not from the direct experience of reality. Scholar and writer Joseph Campbell said that if an American had a choice between going to heaven and going to hear a lecture about heaven, they would go to the lecture. Then we have fear, politics, and how learning types affect understanding. We learn by experience, observation, and instruction. In most cases, experience trumps instruction, but the combination of instruction and observation is powerful too, which is why the media always follows CDC or NIH instructions with COVID statistics, or did back in the day, and I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. This combination of instruction and observation has led to the tribalization of fear, which replaces logic and reason with a survival instinct. It causes people to quickly abandon their personal freedoms and allow themselves to be controlled in the belief that those controlling them possess two characteristics. One, knowledge and subject expertise beyond their own understanding, and two, their best interest at heart. Learning by research and gathering information falls into the observation category and is usually secondhand, which necessitates a component of trust. Field research or information gathered firsthand removes that trust requirement and is therefore often viewed as more credible and worth the logistics of accomplishing. So the Pimpocracy understands and leverages these various components of learning, and through their systematic applications have convinced entire segments of the population that nature is dangerous and to be avoided, when in reality, you are far more likely to be injured or become a victim of violence in a large city. It's ironic. This leads directly into the last idea here, which is the marginalization of the pagan traditions. The marginalization of the pagan traditions is mainly the discounting the notion of the elements. The old pagan elements are earth, air, fire, and water, and the modern education system teaches kids that this stems from an ignorant age when they believed these things to be the only physical elements and knew not of our extensive chemical elemental charts of today. How many of us have heard a teacher say, "They only thought there were 4 elements, earth, air, water, and fire." But really, the pagan concepts used these 4 labels as an elegant illustration of making your way successfully in the world. The earth element represents the physical parts of life, so your body, your home, the land and seas, the woodlands, the food you eat, your physical self and your physical environment. That's the earth element. The air element is your thoughts, your clear ideas, your beliefs. Water represents your feelings and emotions, and fire, your passions, your enthusiasms, your indulgences. The pagan ideal is a balance of these elements in your life. When these things are all working in harmony, then that 5th element, spirit, or the consciousness of the universe as experienced directly, can guide and direct the other four elements to successfully accomplish the best experience for humans and the world alike. Anytime you experience struggle, stress, anger, or continual failure, it is likely because you are giving a disproportionate amount of attention to or neglecting one of those core elements: your body or environment, your thoughts, your passions, or your emotions. Earth, air, fire, water. Becoming aware of this is an extremely effective way for an individual to manage his or her own life, environment, and path in the world. It was this effective individualism that was persecuted by the church and the reason that witches and pagans are still vilified today. When religions were replaced by science, these same witches and pagans became the off-gridding preppers and the free-thinking anarchists, and the system grew to vilify the self-reliant, just as it vilified the witches of old. If we delve deeply into the ancient Gnostic traditions, their baptism rites were whole in this respect. The first baptism was by water, the second was by air, and the last by fire. This is the path of awakening from your physical self into your mind's perceptions, then into the fire or the passion of life. Not to offend anyone's religion, but the modern church, speaking in general terms, has left out the completeness of the original ritual, and today baptisms are done only with water, which is symbolic of emotions and feelings, which are the mechanisms through which the business of centralized religion seeks to control the population. And I know that is thin ice, but it is factual nonetheless. It also brings me to another idea I had recently, and I'm sure someone else thought of this before me, but it was an original thought at the time when I put it in my notes. And I've mentioned this before, I mentioned this just now, but it is this. When science replaced religion as a way to explain the world, science also replaced religion as a way to control the masses. I touched on this concept in Renegade Files episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science. Check it out or share it with a friend if you already listened to it and liked it. Just send them the link to that episode's homepage on our website, which I'll put that link in the show notes for you. And that's Renegade Files episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science, where I first proposed this idea that when science replaced religion as a way to explain the world, it also replaced religion as a way to control the masses. We are all familiar with the old interpretation that the ancients used religion as a way to explain the world. Talked about that a minute ago. We also know that religion was formalized as a way to control the masses. Modern educators are quick to point out that today we use science to explain the world, but they leave out the part about controlling the masses. This gets into a whole thing, and we have large organizations like the CDC and the WHO that assert their scientific authority, and the population defers to them in certain areas. And they may do some good, but they too are largely rent-seeking bureaucrats. So now we can wrap all of this up. A system whose costs far outweigh its benefits is simply not sustainable. A system whose costs are exorbitant and who have no benefits is beyond not sustainable. Such a system can be propped up, but at an exponentially increasing cost. Therefore, a system that is not sustainable will eventually stop being sustained. If you think that the bloated and parasitic U.S. federal government and their corporate cronies have grown into a juggernaut that is too big to fail, then remember, where is Blockbuster? Where is Circuit City? Where is Sears? Where are those gigantic local shopping malls? Gone. And of that list, which is exemplary but far from exhaustive, consider Sears. They were the pioneers of home delivery. Their catalog was in every home. A glossy mail-order magazine that was 3 inches thick, and from it, you could order every household item imaginable, from clothes to bikes to toys and kitchen appliances. There was actually a time when you could order a house from Sears, and they would deliver the hand-built components to you on a semi-truck, and you or a contractor or a service team from Sears would put it together. And those houses were not only beautiful, but solid. Many are still standing today. I'll put a link in the show notes to a page on a site called SearsHomes.org that shows a list of pictures of still existing Sears modern homes, that's what they called them, next to their original catalog pages, elevation sketches, and floor plans, and it's just incredible. The point is, Sears should have been the first Amazon in the internet age. They had nationwide shipping down to a profitable science, and they had a deep and wide catalog of products you could buy by mail. You could buy a house and everything in it from Sears. So what happened? That's a long story, but in short, Sears had developed an investment banking division, and the overall company came under the control of a finance guy who leveraged that division into an underwater position so far gone that Sears went bankrupt and closed. This all happened at the time of the emergence of internet shopping, and they weren't ready to switch to that, or they weren't unable to because of their losses. So a rent seeker who added no value to the organization liquidated a century of hard work and customer goodwill to get rich, and destroyed an American institution in the process. Other companies in that list died because the times and ways of buying and selling retail goods changed, and they couldn't adapt fast enough. In the same way that Sears should have become Amazon, Blockbuster should have become Netflix. But giant bureaucratic companies often can't pivot fast enough, in the case of Blockbuster, or they fall prey to the pimps of the Pimpocracy like Sears. These were huge institutions in America. No one would have believed they would fail, and yet they are gone. And a big, inefficient, wasteful federal government is no different. It will eventually be replaced by something that works better. So what will that something look like? What is the solution to the Pimpocracy? In my opinion, we already have that replacement, and it's a fully functioning alternative, and it's called the state. Thomas Jefferson said the state is the laboratory of democracy. They are smaller and more able to handle their specific needs far better than a centralized federal bureaucracy. And the ones that mismanage their resources, like California, go bankrupt and are forced to reconsider the ways in which they operate, and others are free to do things differently than those states with enormous problems. Even a state is a gigantic management project, but it pales in comparison to the federal government. Another Jefferson quote: "Government is best, which governs least." Thank you sincerely for investigating the Pimpocracy with me. This summer, I have a special treat for you. For the entire summer of 2025, on every Friday in June, July, and August, I will release a 25-minute down and dirty episode in a series I'm calling Renegade Files Short Drives. Many listeners tell me they listen to the show while driving, and the majority of people who don't listen to an entire episode at once listen to exactly half of it. Then they listen to the second half another time, maybe on their next drive. 25 minutes is about the average half length of an episode, so I decided to create this series of 13 episodes to be released every Friday over the summer just for you. These episodes do not and will not replace the main, longer Renegade Files programs, which I will continue to produce. The Renegade Files short drives are in addition to the regular episodes, and you can think of them as my present to you for being a fan of the show. Look for the first one on Friday, June the 6th, which is just a few days from now. And subscribe to or follow Renegade Files now, so together we can meet here next time to explore the deepest covert stories where logic clashes with the official narrative. I am so happy to have you as a part of the Renegade Files crew. If you want to participate more actively in the Renegade Files operation, you can join the RFA agent at patreon.com/renegadefiles. There's a link to that in the show notes also. You can find it with one button at therenegadefiles.com. Jump into the Patreon page. I let you in there totally free for an entire week so you can check it all out. And there's tons of content, bonus episodes, and the Dark Intel Files, which is all the research and pictures and all the cool stuff from every episode. I hope to see you in there. That's patreon.com/renegadefiles, and that's how I make the show work. So until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, diversified child.